Okay, welcome to lesson 2 of the He Has a Plan class. Let me pray to get started. Lord, we thank you again for your word. Just think about the weight of Genesis 1 through 11 and the reality that you could have restarted, you could have reset, and yet you spared your people. It's kind of very humbling that you allow people like us to live, that you've given us a word through which you've communicated very clearly what's happened and what is going to happen and what you do through it all. It is humbling. Lord, would you use the lesson of sin, the very core of our being as sin, to be a great lesson and reminder that we need you desperately. We need you when we wake up. We need you to breathe. We need you to get us through the day. We need you to survive, and it's only by your grace that you sustain us. Would you make us increasingly thankful and decreasingly sinful by your will and by your grace and through faith in your Son. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, last lesson, our focus was on the first bubble in our chart, fancy chart here. We looked at who are the stick figures? Adam and Eve. What's the picture there in the middle? Noah's Ark. And the last one? Babel. Tower of Babel. And what was the unifying lesson through our first image there? Sin. Sin has covered the whole world. Sin has affected and infected every person. Sin is, unfortunately, the primary lesson in the introduction to our Bibles. And I'm going to make the claim that that's exactly what Genesis 1 through 11 is. It is an introduction, often called the prologue, because of course, there is a plot. We looked at the plot. We saw how all of those were one connected story. But specifically, we're not seeing any necessarily direction where this is headed. I think that Genesis 1 through 11, encompassed by this picture here, is for the purpose of introducing us to what is going to happen in the Bible and how God is going to make his plans work. So, we looked at Genesis 1 through 11. We concluded that sin is the issue, sin is the theme, sin is the story. And so we come to the very next verse out of Genesis 1 through 11, which is Genesis 12:1. We met briefly a man named Abram in that last genealogy in Genesis chapter 11. It went from Shem to a man named Terah. Terah fathered a man named Abram. And God starts to speak to Abram. It says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." Verse 2, "And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing." Verse 3, "And I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Now I know this is 3 different slides, so it's going to be hard to think of them in unison. Look at your Bibles. What are some things that jump out to you in these verses? I'll give you the freebie. First, most obvious one is the word blessing. Anyone else see that? We have, "I will bless you so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. All the families of the earth will be blessed." Whoops. That's it. So we're sensing a theme. What might that theme be in these verses? Blessing. Good. Okay. We'll come back to that. Anything else that you notice from these 3 verses? Nation. Why, where, and why does that stand out to you?
Well, country, nation. It's going to be a lot of people.
Yeah, okay, so we're talking about a lot of people. We got country, that's what he's leaving, but great nation. Those families of the earth. Yeah? Anything else?
I will.
Ooh, good one.
Yeah, I see promises of that.
Who's talking? God. I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you. The implied, I will make your name great. Anything on this one? I will bless. Nice. I will curse. Cool. Anything else? You're doing great so far. The last most obvious thing to me is, and I wrote this kind of like an outline form, is that all three of these verses have triplets in them, and two of them have kind of like purpose statements. So he tells Abraham to do this, and to do this, which is essentially the same thing. And the purpose, or the result, will be going to, so he's leaving these things, going to a land. And then here, the three triplets are, I will, I will, I will. I'll make of you a great nation. I'll bless you. I'll make your name great. And then the purpose is so that you will be a blessing. And then in the last one, it's kind of a triplet mixed with a purpose statement. I'll bless, I'll curse, and you, all the families of the earth, will be blessed. So this being the purpose of the blessing and purpose and cursing. So now we have three kind of revelations about something that God's doing. He's going to show Abram some land. He's going to make him a blessing. And he's going to bless all the families of the earth. So land, blessing in his family, and blessing the whole earth. Okay, so now we have Genesis 1 through 11 in mind. We have these verses, which you've probably memorized. So let's go back to the first thing that we looked at. What's one of the themes? What's the first theme that we found? Blessing. Okay. Genesis 1 through 11 is in your mind. We've just seen, coming out of Genesis 1 through 11, that God is making this promise to bless this group of people. So in light of Genesis 1 through 11, what is the blessing that the earth most needs? Money?
Snake crusher.
Food? A snake crusher? Any other thoughts? Free of sin. So our theme for Genesis 1 through 11, which I said was the prologue to the Bible, the theme is sin. God introduces the theme now of blessing. Something is going to change. The thing that needs blessed, the thing that needs fixed, is the sin that we've just been introduced to in Genesis 1 through 11. So I'm arguing, and I think that we'll see this as the class goes on, the blessing that God intends to bless the entire world with is the maybe eradication, the solution to sin, which someone tied into Genesis 3, the snake crusher is going to be connected with that. Again, don't just forget for a moment what's coming, that you remember who's coming and what's coming, and focus on trying to think through the eyes of the people who were reading this for the first time. We need a solution to sin, and God has just fast forwarded through a genealogy at the end of chapter 11 and dug in to take a soil sample, and that soil sample is of a man named Abram. And he has just offered this promise to him. And so now these three verses, I'm arguing, will be the theme of the entire Bible. Genesis 1 through 11 was the prologue. We have the introduction. God is good. He makes good things. People suck. That's my translation. And then we come to chapter 12. And now God is making a promise for a blessing. He's going to fix the problem of sin. He's going to reconcile people to himself. The people that he kicked out of the garden, he's going to bring back to the garden. And so we're going to, throughout the course of the class, recall these verses and check in to see if God is doing these things still and where he is in that step and what he's doing. Okay, so just as a reminder, Genesis 12, 1 through 3 says, Now the Lord said to Abram, I guess I can show those slides. Now the Lord said to Abram, he's an important character, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great. Oh, I forgot that. So that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So we have the promise of a nation, we have the promise of blessing, we have the promise of blessing the whole world, but we also have a division. Something kind of centralizes, focuses on Abram, which is those who are with him get blessed, those who are against him get cursed. Okay, so now we're going to start to trace that theme and see what's going on. And so I'm arguing, I told you in the last lesson that we're going to look at this picture in a three-step play. So now we are in Act 1, Scene 1. In Act 1, Scene 1, I'll give you an outline for this probably closer to the end of class, the end of the class, the big class. Act 1, Scene 1 has 12 steps, and it's going to be the 12 steps to make a great nation. The promise that God gave to Abraham is going to come in 12 steps that I mean, not arbitrarily, but broke down for myself. So it's not inerrant, but that's what we're going to look at. So the next picture in your on your chart is a picture of three men, three stick figures. And we're going to call them the patriarchs. And they are the introduction to the blessing. The very first one is the man that we've seen, which is Abram. So God makes a promise to him. On your chart, there's a big old arrow coming down. That's to show the division, one between the first bubble, which was the prologue, and to show specifically that's where God steps in and does something big according to this plan, this promise, this covenant, this contract, whatever you want to call it. So we come to Abram, we come to the blessing, we come to the patriarchs. We've seen what the world needs in light of Genesis 1 through 11 and his promise to make a great nation out of Abram. What do we need to fulfill that promise? What do we need to make a nation? Babies! We need people. So we have Abram right now. If you rewind just a hair into the end of his genealogy in Genesis 11, after Terah, his fathers Abram, Nahor, and Haran, down to verse 30. So Genesis 11:30 talks about Abram's wife. Now Sarah was barren; she had no child. Okay, so we understand the first step is we need people, and we have a huge problem. We can't have people. We can't have a family. We can't have a nation if there aren't babies being made. And so even from the very beginning, we have to ask the question, or we should at least wonder, why did this go so wrong? What did Abram do to cause this issue? Of course, the answer is Abram didn't do anything wrong. God made this plan, and God is the one that chose to make Sarai barren. Can't he get anything right? So we're going to look at the three patriarchs, and we're going to find out they do essentially the same thing. You know the stories of Moses. He parts the Red Sea. You know the stories of David. He kills Goliath. You know the stories of Samson. He wrestles the lion, right? What does Abram do? What is he famous for? What is the great accomplishment of Abram's life?
Sacrificing the son.
He almost kills his son. That's pretty good to put on your resume. What does Abram accomplish?
God's trust.
God's trust. We'll come back to that. Any other thoughts?
He fathers Isaac.
What's that?
He fathers Isaac.
He fathers Isaac. We need babies, so that's a big thing. Yeah, let's come back to the trust. So what happens is in all three of these, and I'll identify the other two in a moment here, is essentially the same things. One, that patriarch leaves the land. Two, that patriarch returns to the land. 3, that patriarch has a baby or some babies. And then 4, that patriarch dies. Now there are some steps in between those, but that's essentially what happens to all 3 of our patriarchs. They leave the land, they return to the land, they have a baby or 2 or several, and then they die. But the shining feature of our patriarchs, the shining feature of the men that start the faith movement that will become Judaism, that will become Christianity, is not the works of strength that they do, is not the feats and miracles that they do. Instead, the shining moments of each of these men, even in their failures, is that they trust God, is that they receive the promise. Each of them in part, or in time, will each receive the promise from God. The same promise will be passed on to each of them. And their responsibility is to trust God and to obey Him. So Abram does what God said in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. In the next verse, he leaves and he takes his nephew with him. Genesis 12, 4 says that Abram was 75 years old. That's important. Way back in chapter 6, it said God starts cutting people's lives short to 120. So Abram at 75 is getting up there. He's getting pretty old. But God has made this promise to bless him. Then there's a famine, and so first he let me come back to our map, which I didn't use last lesson. This is a map of the world as it's known at this point, if it's not blatantly obvious. This is this is Africa. This is like Egypt here. This is where Israel would be up here, which is called Canaan before it becomes the land that the Israelites live in. This would be the Red Sea. This would be the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, you with me? So Abram's family lives way over here in Ur, I believe. And chapter 11 says they all migrate up the fertile plain up into a land called Haran, which is actually Abram's brother's name. Their plan was to go to Canaan, which is here. Remember last time I told you Canaan's an important place. They intend to go to Canaan, but they apparently find out that Haran is good enough and they stop there. But God says, now Abram, it's time for you to leave. Leave your father, your kindred, your family, and go to the place I'm going to tell you. And so he continues on. He gets to the land of Canaan in 12:5. And that's where the Lord shows up to him and says, this is the spot. This is where I said I was going to show you. This is the spot. I'm going to give this to your people. I'm going to give this to your family. And so after God tells him that, like I said, he leaves the land. There's a famine in Canaan, so he goes down to Egypt. And that's in chapter 13, the story of when Abram tells Pharaoh that Sarai is his sister because he doesn't trust that he won't get killed. He's like, yeah, those Egyptians, they're a rough bunch. Can't trust them. And then ironically, they treat both his wife and him very well. And then they find out that it's his wife, and God sends a plague on the Egyptian Pharaoh, which comes to play again later. But anyhow, so Abram leaves the land, and then he's with his nephew Lot. And in Genesis chapter 13, they're starting to get too big. And so after they've come back to Canaan, Abram says, sorry, but we got to separate. You choose whatever land you want to choose, and I'll take what's left. And so Lot goes east to a place called Sodom and Gomorrah, specifically Sodom, which is, I think, near the Jordan River. And then Abram chooses this land over here, the land that God promised, Canaan. And then in chapter 14, Lot gets kidnapped in this skirmish, this battle, and Abram goes and rescues him with a handful of his people. That's where Abram meets this man named Melchizedek, who becomes a very strangely important person in Hebrews 7. And then in chapter 15, God shows up to Abram, and he says in chapter 15, verse 1, "Fear not, Abram," because apparently when you first see the Lord, because of our sin, it's terrifying. "Fear not, Abram, I'm your shield," as in you'll be protected. "Your reward shall be very great." Things are going to go well for you, Abram. And Abram goes, wait a minute, you made me this promise just 3 chapters ago, and I have no heir. I have this dude who's my maybe servant, maybe cousin, I don't know. I have this dude named Eliezer, and he's my only heir at this point. I thought you were going to give me a son. I thought you were going to make this nation thing work. And God says to him, no, this man won't be your heir. Your very own son will be your heir. And one of my favorite passages, especially in this story, is starts in verse 12. After God, around verse 9, he tells Abram to collect all these animals. And apparently Abram knows exactly what's going on. He cuts the animals in half and lays them in like a row. Now, this is a way of making a covenant, and what happens is these animals are cut in half, they're put in a row, and the two parties that are making a covenant walk through these dead animals together, because the point is, if I break this oath with you, I'm going to be like these animals, cut apart, dead, right? So it's an oath bound by blood. But interestingly, in verse 12, the sun's going down, a deep sleep falls on Abram, and it says, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. So he starts having a nightmare. He's waiting for God to show up to make this covenant, and he starts having a nightmare. And God tells him in that nightmare that his offspring are going to be sojourners, they're going to be foreigners, they're going to be wanderers, they're going to go to another place, and they're going to be slaves for 400 years. So here's this promise that he's made. You're going to be in this land, you're going to be a great nation, but there's going to be a bit of a hiatus. And I was just thinking of this today of like, what if you got this promise from God of like, you're going to be super rich, your family's going to rule the world, one of your kids is going to be president. Oh yeah, this won't happen for 400 years until the year 2400. And you're like, what does that matter to me then? Like, what am I doing here? But Abram was somehow faithful. And so this deep sleep is on him. The sun goes down, it's dark, and a smoking fire pot passes through the pieces of the animals. Because we'll see that the representation of God a lot throughout the Old Testament is smoke and fire and danger. And so Abram's sleeping. He's in like a nightmare coma. He's supposed to walk through these with God to make this covenant, but it's God himself who passes through to show that he's going to keep the covenant. He says to Abram in verse 18, to your offspring I give this land. In verse, where was it? I think I missed it. Somewhere in this chapter, verse 6. So chapter 15, verse 6 says, Abram believed the Lord and he counted it to him as righteousness. Now that is a beautiful verse, because we have seen the brokenness and the failings of humans. And yet, as we said with the patriarchs, Abram believes God. His only major task is believing and obeying God. Abram believes God, and God counts it to him as righteousness. And then this whole sacrifice thing happens. So that's chapter 15, a reminder of what's going on. Then in chapter 16, Abram tries to take things into his own hands. His wife's like, hey, we don't have a baby. Do you want to have a baby with my servant? Which you got to wonder. You got to wonder how that conversation went. And so he says, yeah, I guess so. And he has a son with their servant Hagar. And as you can probably guess, based on family dynamics, that doesn't work out too well. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of issues. And yet, nonetheless, God blesses this kid, Ishmael, who's born in chapter 16, verse 16. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So now we are 11 years after the promise to Abram in chapter 12. Still no kid except for this slave woman's child, which God is going to say, no, that's not going to be the one. In chapter 17, there's another covenant, and this covenant is, here's what you're going to look like as my people, circumcision. If you don't know what circumcision is, you'll want to talk to Josiah. And that is the outward mark of what people who are his followers should look like. And then in that same chapter, the end of chapter 17, a son named Isaac is promised, and things start to get weird because in chapter 18, Abram's like, dude, I'm old, but also my wife is old. How is this going to work? And in 18:14, one of the great verses that we'll keep coming back to is anything too hard for the Lord? You have a wife who is barren, but I have promised you a son through her. And is anything too hard for the Lord? Because Abram laughs at this promise. I'm old, my wife can't have babies. Even if she could have babies, she can't have babies because she's old. is anything too hard for the Lord? Indeed, the answer is no. And so we come to the birth of this young man whose name is Isaac. So our second patriarch is Isaac. Isaac also receives the promise. We now, with the birth of this young man, as you know in chapter 22, God says to Abram, Abram, go sacrifice your son, your only son. And so they go to a mount called Mount Moriah, which is coincidentally the mount that the temple is built on, where many years later another son would be sacrificed. But God says to Abram, sacrifice your son. And the New Testament says that Abram considered that God would even raise him from the dead if he had to, because he was going to fulfill his promise. Another instance of Abram's faithfulness. And as he's going to strike, the sign language name for Abram is this. It makes sense, right? As Abram is going to strike, an angel stops him and says, you passed the test, I guess. And rewind, I skipped a part. While they're coming up the hill, Isaac, who's carrying the wood for his own death, says, we have the wood, but where's the animal for the sacrifice? And Abram says, the Lord himself will provide the lamb. Well, the Lord doesn't provide a lamb. Instead, the angel says, look up, and there's a ram caught in the thicket. That lamb will come much, much later. But nonetheless, God provided for a sacrifice. So what do we need for a nation? We need babies. And we have baby. It's not multiplication, but it's a little bit of addition, so we're doing okay. So Isaac, as he grows up, has to find a wife. And Genesis chapter 24 is the story of Isaac finding a wife. His servant goes and finds this woman at the well because Abram and Sarai want him to have a wife who's a Canaanite, who's from their family and not a Canaanite. And so they have to go elsewhere, and he finds this young woman, and let me find where the reference, in chapter 25, verse 21, it says, and Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife, Rebekah, because she was barren. Okay, so now we have a promise for a great family nation, and the only man that promise is made to has a barren wife. And she has a baby when she's 90 years old, which apparently she's still smoking at that age, because that story of Abram saying, no, she's my sister, happens again when she's 80, I think, with a guy named Abimelech. But so she has this baby, and we have addition. It's not great. It's not multiplication. It's not a great nation. But something's happening. God's keeping, because nothing is too hard for the Lord. Is anything too hard for the Lord? No, of course not. But now we have that only heir, that second patriarch, and his wife is barren. So we go, wait a minute. Why would Isaac choose a barren wife? But if you read the story of chapter 24, Isaac did not choose his wife. God chose his wife. God says, there are these stipulations that are put, that the woman has to be a virgin that comes to the well and offers to give water and all this stuff. And so God coordinates all these pieces to give Isaac a wife so that we can have a nation, so that we can have multiplication. And he fails, apparently, because this woman is barren yet again. We have another barren woman. Can't he get anything right? The major theme of this course, and one I've tried to apply desperately to my life regularly when I have questions, is God is not in a hurry. He grows things. God is not in a hurry. He grows things. That is going to be the theme of this story. He promised a snake crusher in Genesis 3. And we thought he was going to do it right away. We thought we were going to have the Messiah right away. Then we thought we were going to have the Messiah with Noah. And then we thought we thought the problem was going to be fixed. But God's not in a hurry. He's doing something. He's growing things. We just don't know how fast or what he's doing exactly. We have this outline of a plan, but for some reason, God is not in a hurry. He grows things. And so Isaac, the Lord opens... in that very same verse, when Isaac prayed to the Lord because his wife was barren, the next sentence, and the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Okay, we have more addition. We're going from 2, Abram and Sarah, or Abram and Sarai, to 4. Now, Abram, Sarai, Isaac, and his wife Rebekah, now to another baby. But it turns out there are 2 babies in the womb. They're twins, Esau and Jacob. But God says from the very beginning, the older will serve the younger. Normally, the oldest son would be the one that gets all the inheritance, gets the rights, gets all the power. But God says that's not going to be the case. The older is going to serve the younger. And interestingly, we see the twin baby come out holding his brother's heel. And so they name the baby Jacob, which means heel grabber, which is an idiom for cheater. So that's a cool thing to name your baby. But we'll find that the third patriarch is this man named Jacob. And so again, we have a little bit of addition. Things are going slow, but they're working. You probably know the story of Esau sells Jacob his birthright because he's really hungry. In fact, Genesis says that he despised it. I believe it's Hebrews that says Esau searched. How does it say? I can't remember, but he wanted this thing with weeping and tears, but he couldn't find it, and it actually refers to his faith in God. He chooses not to believe God. He chooses not to follow God, and that is shown through his stomach pains when Jacob makes him a meal and sells him his birthright, his inheritance, essentially. And so then Jacob, the cheater, cheats and dresses up like his brother, gives his father, or goes to his father when Esau is supposed to get a blessing. This is in Genesis chapter 27. And because Esau is really hairy, Jacob, with the help of his mother, Rebekah, puts some fur on his arms so that Isaac, whose eyes are dim, who's getting old, he can't see, he feels the arm. He says, that voice doesn't sound like my son Esau, but you feel like Esau. And so he gives them a blessing that's irrevocable. And now Jacob gets the blessing and Esau gets the table scraps. In Genesis 27, verse 36, Esau said, "Is he, Jacob, not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times, selling," he says, "he took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing." And so Esau wants to kill his brother, and so Jacob flees. He leaves the land, and in chapter 28, he's on his way to his uncle Laban. But God stops him before he gets out of the land, and he makes the promise to Jacob, which I need to go back. In chapter 26, God makes the same promise to Isaac as he made to Abram. Chapter 26, verse 3, he says to Isaac, "Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands." Remember, he's in Canaan. "And I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham, your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and I will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed." Do you hear the similar phrases to Genesis 12, 1 through 3? He's making the same covenant, the same contract, the same promise to Isaac. Well, then when Jacob is trying to run away because he cheated his brother, and he's afraid he's going to be killed like Abel was, although justly maybe. The Lord stops him, and Jacob has a dream. He sees, I think this is the one where he sees the ladder. Let me check. Yeah. In 28 verse 12, he sees a ladder going from heaven to earth, angels ascending and descending on it, because it's showing that God is coming to earth. God is bridging the gap between earth and heaven. Jesus references himself in this in John 1. But in this dream, when Jacob sees the ladder, the Lord says in verse 13, 28:13, "And behold, the Lord stood above it." So he's standing at the top of the ladder. He said, "I am the Lord, I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth," which is similar to a promise he made earlier to Abram. "You shall spread abroad," blah, blah, blah. Not blah, 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 it's important, but the end of verse 14, in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Verse 15, behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So now all three patriarchs are receiving the same promise. We're still in this promise of a nation of blessing the earth. They've all received it, but for some reason, even though the thing that we need is babies, we're having some, but not enough. We're having addition, but not multiplication. So Jacob goes to his uncle Laban, and he sees this really attractive girl who must be his cousin or something. I can't remember how the lineage lines out, but and her name is Rachel. And she's beautiful, but she's the second daughter. And he works 7 years for his uncle, Uncle Laban, and apparently gets pretty sloshed so that on his wedding night, he sleeps with the wrong girl, and he's actually married to Leah. And Leah is described as one whose eyes are dim, which is a curious idiom for she ain't too pretty. But Jacob marries her, and Laban says, oh, didn't I tell you we can't give the younger sister away before we give the older sister away? So how about you work for me 7 more years? Notice the theme of cheating in this family, of tricking, of deceiving. And so he marries Rachel, and he has to work 7 more years. Now we come to the end of Genesis 29. Verse 31 says, when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, so Jacob loves Rachel, the pretty one, and hates Leah. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb. But Rachel was barren. Starting to see a theme here. God and man choosing these women, but we're trying to build a nation here, God, but he keeps picking barren women because he's not in a hurry. He's growing things. And so we come to a very interesting story, which we're going to slow down to look at. And that is the story of one seriously dysfunctional family, which will make your family seem a whole lot less intense, I'm pretty sure. If you have a more intense family, I'm sorry. So this is Jacob. He marries Leah first, and then gets Rachel, the one that he really loves, and the Lord. It's already a mess. Imagine how that household goes. Well, we're about to see. And then he opens her womb, even though she is the one who is loved. So, now, as we go through the story, this is 29:32. And Leah conceived and bore a son. She called his name Reuben. So now we have, did it again. Now we have a son named Reuben. Well, what does Reuben mean? Reuben, oh my gosh, Reuben is fat on accident. Reuben, she called him Reuben because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me, because Reuben means see, a son. Look, I have a son. So now maybe my husband will love me. So we have Reuben. Can you tell just by the name of her son how desperate this relationship is, how much of a challenge these things are going to be? Okay, let's continue on. My husband will love me. She conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord heard that I am hated, he has given me a son also. So she called his name Simeon. So now we have another son. His name is Simeon, which means God heard me. God heard that I was hated. So first is look a son, maybe my husband will love me. Now it's the Lord knows that I'm hated, so he gave me a son. Again, verse 34, she conceived and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will be attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi, because Levi means attached. Maybe my husband will love me. Now, maybe my husband will have to at least stay with me. Maybe he'll be attached to me. That's Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son. This time I will praise the Lord. It seems like she's forgetting all else. I can't win this fight with my husband. He doesn't love me. This time I'll praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing, because Judah means praise. So we're starting to get multiplication. That's cool. We're starting to see the nation, but it's quite a mess. We're seeing some issues. But then Leah stops having children. And then we come to chapter 30, verse 1, when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die," which is a cool way to start a conversation. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God? Who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" I don't know if he's blaming God or correcting his wife or both here, but you get a sense of how the conversations around the dinner table go. Then she said, here's my servant Bilhah. So let's do, how are we going to do this? Here's my servant, much like Abram. She can have kids for me. Go into her that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, you can almost sense Rachel showing up at the delivery room and taking the baby immediately and saying, God has, this is 30 verse 6. God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore, she called his name Dan. So these two have a baby named Dan because Dan means God has judged me, and apparently the scales were found in her favor. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed. You start to see continue to see the dysfunction. I wrestled with my sister. And so she names her son Naphtali, which means wrestling. So now we have another son because I wrestled with my sister. Okay? Then Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children. Okay, this is getting intense. She took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. So now we have 4 women that Jacob is married to, so that she can have children for her sake. And Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Verse 11, Leah said, good fortune has come. I've been so lucky. So she called his name Gad, which means good fortune. So we have Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And Leah said, happy am I, for women have called me happy. I'm so happy I've had another son. I'll call this kid's name Happy, which is Asher. So now we have serious multiplication, but serious issues. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 kids, 4 women, and Jacob. We're starting to see a nation, but this is not a country that I would want to be a part of because it's a serious mess. And after this, in the middle of the story, verse 14, there's a harvest. Reuben, who was the firstborn over here, Reuben finds some mandrakes in a field, and he brings them to his mother Leah so they can eat. And Rachel looks at Leah and says, I want some of those mandrakes. I want some of that. That food looks good. And so Leah says, then I get to sleep with my husband tonight. If you want some mandrakes, I'll take having sex with my husband. And so she prostitutes her husband out for some food and lays with Jacob and has another kid. Verse 17, God listened to Leah. She conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Leah said, God has given me my wages. That's a nasty term to use in this. God paid me for the prostitution because I gave my servant to my husband. So she called his name Issachar, which means wages, I think. Now we're here. Issachar. And Leah conceived again. She bore Jacob a 6th son. Then Leah said, God has endowed me with good endowment. He gave me the things that I wanted. Now my husband will honor me because I've given him 6 sons. You remember, my husband loved me. My husband will be attached to me. Now maybe my husband will honor me. And so she called his name Zebulun, which I think means honor. Yes. And then finally in verse 22, God remembers Rachel. He listened to her prayer and opened her womb. You have to wonder if she deserves it, if any of them deserve it. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. Finally, I've had a kid, and she called his name Jacob, meaning, may he add another. Okay? So she's in anticipation of another. Now, for the first time, these two have had a kid. I don't even know what to do with this. Whoops. They've had a son. May he add another. That's Joseph. All right. One big happy family, right? Yeah. So that is quite the mess. So now we have the story of our patriarchs. We have the story of God picking these women who are barren. We have the faithfulness of God in making these women have babies, allowing these women to have babies so that he can fulfill the promise that he made to Abram to make a nation. And despite the fact that his people are taking everything into their own hands and other places, he is doing what he promised. He's making a great nation, messy though it may be. When we get next lesson to Exodus chapter 1, it says that 70 people with Jacob went down to Egypt. We'll get to that story here in a moment, but 70 people went with Jacob down into Egypt. And so we're starting to see the small workings of a nation. Ruth 4, the book of Ruth, says that Rachel and Leah themselves built the house of Israel. So we're looking towards this great nation, this nation that will be called Israel. And the elders in Ruth 4 say that Rachel and Leah by themselves built the house of Israel. I don't know if those elders are overlooking the intense, disgusting nature that they built the house of Israel with, or they're kind of whitewashing history, or they just simply don't remember. They don't know the story, but they attribute good things to them. It is good things. Babies are being made, but the way that it happens is a disgusting mess. Just proving over and over again that lesson that we learned in the prologue in Genesis 1 through 11, that man is full of sin. So after all these things happen, we have 11 kids, and Jacob goes to run away from his uncle Laban. In chapter 31, it's interesting, in 31:7, he says to his wife, "Your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. He cheated me," the cheater. So he runs away. You can read that story if you want. Laban chases him, all this stuff. And Jacob says to him in chapter 31, verse 42, "If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed." God refers to himself and is referred to as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, over 50 times in the scriptures. Because despite the things that we're seeing, these three men, which is the main lesson that we're learning here today, these three men, the patriarchs, they are the founding fathers of the faith. Despite their, at times, faithlessness, they are marked by their faith in God. They are marked as the people that bring forth a nation. They are marked as people to whom the promise has been given. And so God refers to himself as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And each time he does that, he's referring all the way back to that promise in Genesis 12. He's trying to get us to think of this plot, this theme throughout the scriptures to understand what he's doing in the world. And so after this mess of children, after Jacob runs away, we start to see some serious land issues. Jacob returns to Esau, his brother. He's returning to the land. And you can imagine he's pretty freaked out. In fact, he sends, in chapters 32 to 33, he sends out messengers ahead of him and says, "Hey, tell my brother I'm coming, and maybe get a feel for if he's still going to kill me or not, you know?" And the messengers come back and they're like, "I don't know, man, but he's coming with 400 dudes with him." And so, of course, Jacob is shaking in his boots. And Jacob sends hundreds of livestock ahead of him to Esau, and they come in groups with servants and with food, and he sends them ahead of him so that each time Esau is reminded, "Hey, I've been blessed, but I'm giving you these things. We're on the same side, right? You're still my brother. You're not going to kill me, right?" And then they get closer to one another, and he sends his family away, and that at night he wrestles with God. You probably heard that story. His name is changed to Israel, which is, this is the end of chapter 32, which is an important name for the nation that is coming. And then in chapter 33, Esau is close. He's right around the bend. And so Jacob sends in front of him his own family. Each of the 4 women take their kids and go in front of him. And Jacob is left alone, wondering, is my brother going to kill me? And he falls at his brother's feet. And his brother falls on his neck, and they hug and they embrace. And it's a beautiful moment, despite the fact that just a few chapters ago, Esau wanted to kill his brother. So they're reconciled, but we start to see these land issues. We saw them with Abraham. He had to buy a burial plot from the Canaanites that he and his wife would be buried in. We saw it with when he and Lot separated. We saw it a little bit with Isaac, and now we see it with Jacob and Esau. Esau says, "Come with me," and Jacob says, "No, there's not enough space. We have all this stuff, which is awesome, but I got to go. I got to go to the land." And chapter 34 is the very interesting story of Dinah, who was one of the kids born in this story. She's the only girl mentioned because her story comes up in chapter 34 where she's raped. Her rapist says, "I want to marry her." And they say, we can't let you marry her. Her brothers, these ones, say, "We can't let you marry her unless you're all circumcised." And so ask Josiah what happened, and while they're still in pain from the circumcision, her brothers kill this entire group of people. And Jacob, at the end of chapter 34, says to Simon and Levi, this is verse 30, "You have brought trouble on me by making me a stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites." So this is in Canaan, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. So now he's afraid because they're in the land they're supposed to be in, but other people are in charge of the land, and he's afraid that they're going to strike back, that they're going to be angry, that they're going to kick them out of the land because there are all these land disputes. And they go on and on. There's the temptation to intermarry where many of the patriarchs have to go elsewhere to choose a wife from their own family so that they won't intermarry with the Canaanites. There's land issues in the land that God has promised. And then we come to Genesis 37 and the story of this youngest one. Actually, I think I skipped. Yeah, and as a brief side note, there's one more kid born in chapter 35, verse 18. Rachel gets pregnant again, so that's the one that's loved. Rachel gets pregnant again, and she's dying. Remember her saying, "Give me a child or I die"? Well, that's about to happen. Actually, both things are about to happen. So she's having a son, and she's dying as she's giving birth, and she calls him "son of my sorrow," son of my pain, which is Ben-Oni. But his father, Jacob, renames him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand, son of power, because he has a special love for these two sons because it's from this relationship which he loves. And so when we get to chapter 37, we see Joseph. Verse 2 says, "These are the generations of Jacob," but mostly it's a focus on Joseph and his and how good he is, while the rest of the brothers, with Benjamin excluded, are a huge mess. So Joseph has these dreams. He says, "My brothers, you're going to bow down to me. Even mom and dad, you're going to bow down to me." And they say, "We want to kill you," as older brothers tend to do. And so they want to kill him. Reuben says, "Let's not kill him. Let's just throw him in a pit. No big deal, right?" Apparently he leaves, and then the brother Judah says, "Let's not kill him. Let's sell. There's no profit to us." This is 37:26. If we kill him, we don't get any profit. So let's sell him to these slave traders that are coming through from Egypt. They're Ishmaelites. Ishmael being that first son of Abram. And Reuben returns to rescue his brother from the pit, and he finds that the brother has been sold into slavery, and he's gone. Jacob is 17 at this point. That's 37 verse 2. And then, surprisingly, even though chapters 37 through 50, we're in a soil sample moment where all of these chapters are about Joseph, one chapter is put right in the middle, and that's chapter 38. And it's totally unrelated to Joseph. It's about Judah and Tamar, his daughter-in-law. And you can read that story. It's very interesting. But the point is that Judah doesn't do for his daughter-in-law what he's supposed to do because he's afraid she kills she's a black widow. One of his sons dies, and then another marries her, and he dies, and he's afraid the third one's going to die. And so she has to dress up as a prostitute. He sleeps with her. She gets pregnant and blackmails him. And it's just this huge mess, all to show that we're focusing on Jacob, but these dudes are a nasty mess. This is the one that says, let's not kill him, let's just throw him in a pit. This is the one that says, let's not kill him because we don't make any money. And then he sleeps with his daughter-in-law, who he thinks is a prostitute. And then we come back to the story of Joseph, because there's this contrast between who Joseph is and who his brothers are. And so we get to chapter 39. He's this righteous dude, and he's a slave and a teenager in Egypt, and he somehow becomes like second in command or maybe third in command to Potiphar. And Potiphar's wife makes a pass at him, and he refuses. He runs away, but he's accused of trying to rape her, and so he's thrown into jail. And in jail, he's shown favor. Let me see if I can find it really quick. Chapter 39, verse 23, the keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge. He gets put in charge of people in the prison and things in the prison because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. And so he's in prison. Chapter 40 shows two guys that come in, cupbearer and baker, and they both have dreams. And Joseph interprets the dreams and says, to you, cupbearer, you're gonna return to serving Pharaoh, and you, baker, your dream means that you're going to be killed. And so he says to the cupbearer, he says to the baker, says to the cupbearer, hey, don't forget me. When you're restored to your position under Pharaoh, don't forget me. Chapter 40, verse 23 says, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. And so Joseph, the very next verse, 41, verse 1, after 2 whole years, he's in prison 2 more years, and then Pharaoh has a dream, and the cupbearer goes, oh yeah, I remember this dude who interpreted my dream, and Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream and realizes that there's going to be a famine, a 7-year famine in the land of Egypt. And he says there's going to be 7 good years, 7 famine, and we need to start doing something. So Joseph, who went from being the favorite son to being almost killed by his brothers, to being a slave in Egypt for years and years, gets lifted up to like the CEO of the Department of Agriculture and second over the land of Egypt. And his brothers, and there's 7 years, the silos fill up and there's all this food, and everything is happening exactly how Joseph interpreted the dream. And then there's a famine, and the famine begins, and people are coming from all around, and his brothers, if we go back to the map, so Egypt's down here. This is where Joseph was sold. Canaan is up here. That's where his brothers live. And so his brothers come down to the land of Egypt because of the famine, and they start to get food. And Joseph tricks them. They can't tell because of his Egyptian garb and his Egyptian accent, and the fact that it's many years later. In fact, in one of the next few chapters, it says he's 30 years old. So it's been 13 years since he's been sold into slavery. 13 years, half of his life, he's been a slave in Egypt. And his brothers come, they don't recognize him. He tricks them, makes them go back to their father, except for, and they have to bring back Benjamin, because Benjamin's the only one that's not there. Joseph's only whole brother, rather than half and stepbrothers. And they go back, leaving, I think, Simeon in prison in Egypt. And the brothers say to Jacob, this old man now, hey, we got to take Benjamin back to Egypt. And Jacob says, no way, I'll die. If you lose this kid like you lost the last one, I will die. I can't handle the son that I love being killed again. He still doesn't know the reality of what Joseph's brothers did to him, but eventually they take Reuben back, and through all this, Joseph reveals himself as their brother, and instead of, he does trick them again, but instead of killing them, instead of punishing them, he falls around their neck and he weeps and he reveals himself. He says, I'm Joseph, I'm your brother, I didn't die. You did this thing, but I'm here, and look what God has done. Go, get Dad, bring him back. And so they go back to the land. They say, Dad, Joseph is alive. You got to come to Egypt. He's the guy that we've been talking to. He's the guy that we thought was going to kill us. You got to come back. And Jacob's like, I don't know, but my son's alive, and I love my son, and I miss him. And so the whole family goes back. They go back to the land of Egypt. And it's during those 7 years of famine that they're back in Egypt. And so during this time, they're they're granted land, space. I think it's somewhere in the desert of Egypt to live, and Joseph is still in charge. This is the only place to find food, and so Egyptians start selling their land. By the end of the 7th year, they start selling their land to Joseph, and Egypt acquires all of the land, and the family gets bigger and bigger. And then in chapter 48, Jacob, grandpa, blesses Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. In fact, he blesses them in the wrong order, much like he himself was blessed. And then in chapter 49, he blesses his 12 sons. And I have to wonder if in all these blessings, there's a little bit of each person's characteristic. But you'll have to read that story and decide for yourself. And then Jacob dies at the end of chapter 49. And we get to chapter 50. And Jacob is gone. And now the brothers go, okay, there's nothing stopping Joseph from killing us. He's in charge. He's held this grudge forever. We know it. He was 30 when the years of plenty started. So by the end of the famine, he's 44, because 7 plus 7. He's going to kill us. And so in chapter 50, let me read the account. After Jacob dies, it says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, it may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father gave this command before he died, which you have to wonder if he really gave this command. If they're like, hey, on Dad's deathbed, this is what he said. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. So like, hey, we're brothers. Also, hey, we worship the same God who Dad worshipped. And then Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, behold, we're your servants. Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and for your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So Genesis 1 through 11, we saw the issue is sin. Genesis 12, we see the promise for this great nation. And slowly, piece by piece, we see addition. We see children being added on. And then a little bit of multiplication. Jacob has 12 sons, but it's a mess. But here we see a major theme of the Bible in Genesis 50, verse 20. As for you, you meant it for evil against me, but God meant it for good, so that, 2, bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. You meant it for evil, God meant it for good, and his purposes are that so that people can live, so that people can fill the earth with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. And so we looked at Genesis 1 through 11. We looked at the next picture, which is the patriarchs, and now the third picture, step 2. So step 1 was the patriarchs. Step 2 is, what's that picture look like to you? How many people? It's a dozen. It's 12 because it's the 12 sons of Jacob, which will become the 12 tribes of Israel. The 12. We're starting to finally see multiplication, and if we had to highlight one, we'd focus on this one. The next to last one, Joseph, because his story dominated almost a third of the book of Genesis, all to show that God is. He's not in a hurry. He's growing things. He's working this plan according to his will, this plan that he promised to Abram and passed down through to his to his son and then his son. And now we're starting to see the plan slowly accomplished. So for a nation, we need people. We need babies. We're starting to have babies. What's something else that we need for a nation? We need land. The land has been promised. Remember, that's up in Canaan. If you're picturing the map still here, that's up in Canaan, but they're down in Egypt. They're not in the land that God promised them. So next time when we come together, we're going to look at what God is going to do about the fact that his people are not in the land that he promised.